Hey everyone, this one starts with a quick meeting that feels off and only gets stranger from there. Stick with me till the end, you won't see it coming. And if you're into stories like this, hit subscribe, you'll want more. At 4:46 p.m., on a Tuesday in late March, HR booked me for a quick sync like I was a calendar glitch. No agenda, no manager. Just Sable Wren, smiling too hard, and Perry Quaid, the outside legal guy with a crisp tie and dead eyes. My name is Bram Halloway. I was 44 years old, lived in Portland, Oregon, and I'd been at Cinder & Coast Creative for 14 years. I knew fake meeting tones, and this one tasted like metal. Sable folded her hands on the table. "This is part of a reorganization," she said. Perry slid a paper-clipped packet toward me and didn't even pretend it was a draft. They'd spelled my last name wrong again. Same bad letters like they never read my work. Perry said, "This is your separation agreement. Severance and confidentiality are outlined inside." He pointed to a signature block like it was a finish line. Sable kept dropping the same line. "This isn't about you, Bram. It's a business decision." Every time, it landed personal. I sat there, quiet, while they ran the script about releases and mutual terms that weren't mutual. I watched the wall clock and did the math. They weren't giving me time to breathe. They were trying to get me out before I remembered what I owned. Quick note, before listening, share which city or country you're watching from. And let's continue. Perry cleared his throat. "We'll need your badge, keycard, and any physical access items." Sable added, "Right now, please. Also, clear your desk before the office closes." I slid my badge over first, then the keyring. 10 keys, all labeled in my handwriting. Tags faded the color of weak tea. My personal keys stayed in my pocket. House, truck, and one dull brass spare Orson had handed me years ago for a lock that had already been changed. Sable pinched them like they were dirty. I said, "Once you give up keys, you don't get to complain about locked doors." She blinked and looked at Perry like she needed a translator. Out in the open area, a temp was covering the front desk. Junie Vale, maybe 23, headset too big. She stood up like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to. "I'm sorry they're doing this to you," she said. Sable walked past her without a glance. They gave me a rolling bin and a cardboard box from the supply closet. I packed fast and silent, tossing notebooks, pens, a framed team photo I didn't bother looking at. When I yanked open my bottom drawer for the last time, my knuckles hit my just-in-case folder, the lease packet, amendments, building notices, dates I'd memorized because nobody else respected them. I made one extra trip to the archive closet behind the presentation room. The door always stuck unless you lifted it, so I popped it with my shoulder, grabbed the folder, and tucked it under my arm like junk mail. Then I walked out with my box before the security guard started his rounds. When I got home, I set the box by the fridge and left it there like it was radioactive. I spread the papers across my kitchen table, the way my dad taught me to lay out parts in the garage. Clean surface, good light, no rushing, because rushing was how you lost screws and blood. I made coffee even though it was late, because sleep wasn't on the menu anyway. The machine gurgled and hissed, and the whole place smelled like burnt beans and stale office carpet clinging to my clothes. I kept the place quiet. No music. No calls. I didn't need comfort. I needed facts. The lease packet still smelled like old toner and paper clips, like it had been sweating in a drawer for years waiting for someone to stop being lazy. I was the one who kept it organized, because nobody else respected dates. Nolan respected vibes, and Sable respected templates, and somehow that counted as leadership while I kept the real world from falling on their heads. I flipped straight to the renewal section, the part I always reread during budget season, because it was the only paragraph in that whole building that didn't care about somebody's ego. The clause was short and sharp, written notice by a set deadline, or the term rolled into month to month under the tenant of record. I traced the line with my finger, like touching it would make it less real. I checked the expiration date. Then I checked the notice deadline. Then I checked the calendar on my phone like maybe I'd gotten stupid overnight. They'd missed it, and not by a couple hours that you could beg away. They'd missed it by days. The company had kept occupying the suite like nothing happened. Same staff, same meetings, same little snack bar in the corner, while the paperwork quietly changed underneath them. That's the thing about contracts. They don't care who got promoted, who got fired, or who thought they were untouchable. I didn't feel like cheering. I felt like somebody finally took a concrete block off my chest, and my lungs didn't know what to do with the extra room. I called Lyle Merritt, the commercial lease lawyer I knew through a neighborhood friend. He picked up fast, sounding wired, like he always had 3 tabs open in his head and none of them were calm. I said, "Lyle, I got terminated today, and I need you to look at one clause right now." He didn't ask how I was doing because he wasn't that kind of friend, and honestly I respected him for it. He said, "Tell me what you're holding." I said, "Lease packet, renewal section, and it looks like they blew the notice deadline." He paused and then asked, "Whose name is the tenant of record?" I stared at the page even though I already knew the answer, and I said, "Mine." There was a beat of silence, then a low whistle like he'd just watched a good card flip over. He said, "Do not get cute. Do it clean, documented, and slow enough that nobody can claim confusion later." I went back through my own notes and found something else I'd filed years ago. An occupancy addendum that let the company operate there under my lease, plus a restriction about sub-occupants. The minute I read that line, I remembered Nolan letting a strategy consultant squat in the small glass office for months like it was his personal clubhouse. Nobody cleared it with me, because nobody cleared anything with me unless the building would have sued. I didn't email anyone to help, and I didn't warn Sable that she'd stepped on a landmine. I said into the phone, "I'm done saving adults from their own paperwork." Lyle didn't argue with me. He just said, "Then we treat this like a straight business decision," and I pulled a pen from the junk drawer and started writing a timeline on a clean sheet of paper. I kept writing that timeline until my hand cramped, then I tore the page off clean and tucked it inside the lease packet like it belonged there. The next couple days, I didn't chase anyone, and I didn't send any emotional messages I'd regret later. I just moved like a guy following a checklist, because that was the only way to keep anger from driving the car. 2 days later, I met Orson Pike in the lobby of the old brick tower downtown. The place always smelled like floor wax and expensive impatience, and the sound bounced off the stone like nobody was allowed to relax. Orson stood near the security desk, squared up like he was guarding the building with his personality alone. Orson was the kind of guy who loved rules because rules didn't talk back. He wore a blazer like armor and carried a clipboard like it was personal, like the paper could testify on his behalf if someone got loud. I didn't stroll in acting big, and I didn't slink in acting guilty. I walked in like I belonged, because I did. For 14 years, I'd been the one answering Orson's emails, signing vendor forms, and smoothing over every small issue that would have turned into a big bill if ignored. I knew how he liked his forms filled out, which doors stuck in winter, and what kind of excuses he didn't tolerate. He looked me over and his eyes flicked to my hands like he expected a badge or a company escort. He said, "Did Nolan send you down here?" His tone wasn't friendly, but it wasn't hostile either. It was the tone of a guy trying to figure out which rulebook applied. I said, "No, Nolan sent me home." I watched his face shift as he decided whether that was his problem or someone else's mess. Orson didn't offer sympathy, and I didn't ask for it, because sympathy didn't move paperwork. I kept it simple. "Did you receive renewal notice by the deadline?" I didn't dress it up, and I didn't give him a story he could misunderstand. Orson didn't guess. He turned slightly, opened his system, and clicked around with slow, careful motions, like speed made people sloppy. After a few seconds, he said, "No renewal notice on file." Then he added, almost like he couldn't help himself, "A month ago, your leadership asked about expanding floors like they wanted options." That line hit harder than I expected, because it told me somebody had been shopping for a shiny future while letting the real deadline rot in a drawer. I didn't argue with him about why, and I didn't tell him what I thought of leadership. I just pulled out the clean termination notice Lyle had prepped, tied to the month-to-month conversion, and held it out. "I want this served properly," I said. "Certified, emailed, logged, and posted if you have to." Orson took it like it weighed something. He asked, "Do they know about this?" I said, "They got mail. Whether they read it is their hobby." Orson didn't smile, but his eyes sharpened a little, like he respected a person who spoke in dates. I told him I had a replacement tenant ready because I wasn't here to make drama and disappear. That part was true. I'd met Mara Sloan months earlier at a local small business mixer, and she ran a wellness studio brand called Bloom Pulse. She was quiet, practical, money-backed, and always on time, which already made her more professional than half the people I'd worked for. Orson raised a brow at the word wellness, like he pictured scented candles and chaos. I said, "Her business plan is boring in the best way, and boring pays rent." He asked for numbers, and I gave him numbers that were triple what Nolan had been bragging about saving. Right before I left, Orson said, "Your HR sent a request last week asking for confirmation that all building keys were returned by separated employees." His voice stayed neutral, but the meaning wasn't. That wasn't normal, and it wasn't routine, and it sure wasn't curiosity. I nodded like I didn't care. Then I stepped outside and typed that line into my phone notes before the cold air even finished hitting my face. My fingers were still cold from being outside when my phone buzzed again. I unlocked it and saw her name, and I almost laughed, because it was so predictable it felt scripted. Sable Wren had timing like a metronome when she wanted control. Subject line, property return confirmation. The email sounded polite the way a security camera sounded polite. It was stiff, careful, and copied to Perry Quaid, like she wanted an audience for whatever story she planned to tell later. She asked me to confirm I'd returned all company assets, documents, and access items, and the phrasing was wide enough to catch a whale. I could have replied with one word and moved on. I could have played nice and kept it simple, because I was tired, and I didn't feel like sparring over email. Then Orson's line flashed through my head like a warning light. HR wasn't checking a box, they were building a file. If they were building a file, I wasn't going to let them be the only ones writing in it. I sat at my kitchen table, opened my laptop, and wrote back like I was answering a safety inspector who didn't get jokes. Short sentences, no heat, no extra adjectives they could twist into hostile. I typed. I returned my badge and the company keyring during the termination meeting. Then I added one more line, plain and quiet. Per your request, I am also returning any documents that could be considered company-related. I attached what mattered and nothing else. Tenant of record page, renewal clause, occupancy addendum, the sub-occupant restriction. I didn't label it a threat, and I didn't put gotcha energy in the subject line. I labeled the attachment documentation because that word didn't blink. When I hit send, I didn't feel relief. I felt locked in, like a bolt sliding into place. 5 minutes later, Lyle texted me. That was perfect, because they just confirmed receipt in writing. Right after that, he sent a screenshot of his filing receipt for the termination notice and the demand to vacate, stamped and time-logged like the building's own heartbeat. That evening, Cal Dobbins texted me. Cal handled vendors, access schedules, and all the little moving pieces that kept the office from tripping over itself. He wasn't a gossip, so when he said, "Heads up, Sable is asking who has copies of your old binders," I didn't take it as chatter. I took it as smoke. I texted back, "Do not stick your neck out for me. Save anything you already have into your own folder, and keep your hands clean." Cal replied, "Understood," and I knew exactly what that meant. He wasn't volunteering for a fight, but he also wasn't going to help her rewrite history. The next morning, Cal filled me in again. Junie was still at the front desk, still trying to be helpful in a room full of sharks. Cal said, "Junie got a certified envelope and didn't know what it was." Then he added, "Sable told her to set legal stuff aside, and I watched Sable toss it into her tote like it was junk mail." That mattered, because Sable's whole game was plausible deniability. If she could say, "We never received notice," she would say it with the same practiced smile she used in that meeting room. But Orson didn't play that game. He posted a copy to the suite door packet slot and emailed Nolan's executive assistant, and those logs didn't care about who wanted to feel innocent. By the end of that week, Mara Sloan had her application in, deposit lined up, and proof of funds ready. Lyle told me, "Once the building accepts her, your old company is on a clock they didn't even realize started." I texted him back, "Good, because deadlines never forgave me either." And I dragged every screenshot and email into a folder on my desktop labeled Receipts. After I built my little folder of receipts, I stopped pretending I was still part of the building's day-to-day. I didn't have a front row seat for whatever meltdown was happening behind that glass suite door, and I wasn't going to invent one. I learned it the way everybody learns the truth now. Texts from Cal, forwards from Lyle, and outside chatter filling in the ugly gaps. Cal hit me first. "They finally opened the notice," he wrote. Nolan's face went gray, like somebody unplugged him. A minute later, another text came in. "Sable keeps saying this is an administrative misunderstanding, like repeating it turns it into reality." Even through a screen, I could hear how tired he was. He wasn't excited and he wasn't petty. He sounded like a guy watching adults run into a wall and blame the paint. Lyle followed up with the paperwork side, because that was his language. He forwarded the building's delivery confirmations with timestamps, signatures, and the whole chain like a set of handcuffs. His note was simple. "They cannot credibly claim surprise." Then he added, "Keep your communications clean, because people who lose power get creative with the story." I didn't need the warning, but it helped hearing it from someone who made a living around liars. Around lunch, Cal sent a photo from the hallway. It was the suite door packet, and in that plastic sleeve was Orson's posted notice of termination. 30 days to vacate from the service date, printed in plain language that didn't care who thought they were special. Cal didn't write a caption, because he didn't have to. The picture said, "The clock started," and it didn't ask for opinions. Later that afternoon, the online chatter showed up right on cue. A local business blog ran a short item about a downtown creative firm facing sudden relocation after a lease dispute. They didn't name names at first, just vague hints like they were trying to look responsible. The comments didn't bother with responsible. Names popped up fast, because somebody always knew somebody, and people loved watching a confident brand take a hit. Inside the office, Nolan apparently tried to grab the mic and turn it into a victory story. Cal wrote, "He called in all hands and framed it as a strategic move to support growth." Then Cal added, "He said it like he believed it, but nobody did." That was the thing about Nolan. He could sell air as a product, but he couldn't sell truth when the door had a legal notice on it. Sable went a different direction, and it was exactly as petty as I expected. Cal told me she started a separate thread about missing property and retained documents, planting the first little seeds of a smear. She wanted it on record that I might be withholding something, like I was the problem instead of her missed deadlines. The issue for her was she'd asked me to return everything, and I had done it in writing with attachments. Perry Quaid tried the cold approach through Lyle, which was hilarious because he always acted like feelings were beneath him. Lyle forwarded me Perry's email asking about informal resolution options, like this was a spilled coffee they could wipe up. Lyle's response was one clean line: "We are already in formal channels. Respond in writing. No drama, just a door closing." Cal kept feeding me the infighting like a live report. "They're blaming each other," he wrote. "Nolan says legal failed him, Sable says ops failed her, and Perry says he was not looped in." It was almost funny watching grown adults fight over who didn't read a page, almost. That night, my phone lit up with Nolan's name. I didn't answer, and I let it roll straight to voicemail while I opened the message and hit save. The next evening, my phone rang again, and Nolan's name filled the screen like it owned the place. I picked up because I wanted him to hear my voice steady, not angry, and I wanted a clean record of how he talked when he didn't get his way. I said, "I'm listening, Nolan, so say what you need to say." He didn't waste time pretending we were buddies. "We can work this out," he said, like I was a vendor he could sweet-talk back into compliance. He started pitching me a consulting bridge, which was a fancy way of saying, "Come back and clean up our mess without us admitting we were wrong," and he said a number like it was generous. It wasn't generous, and he knew it. It was cheaper than paying attention. I kept my tone flat because flat makes people reveal themselves. "This isn't personal," I told him. "This is paperwork." He exhaled hard like I was being difficult on purpose. "Don't be like that," he said, and that line told me everything, because he wanted feelings and favors, not dates and signatures. While he kept talking, I opened my laptop and pulled up a draft email like Lyle had told me to do. I typed with my hands steady and my jaw tight, keeping it clean and boring, because boring was what held up in court. I wrote that Nolan had called to discuss the lease situation, that he acknowledged the renewal notice had not been submitted by the deadline, and that he was requesting an exception or workaround, and I made sure every sentence sounded like a meeting recap instead of a fight. Nolan tried another angle when he realized the charm wasn't landing. "Don't do this to the staff," he said. "You're hurting them with this." That one almost hit, because I did think about the staff, and I hated that they were stuck under his bad choices. But then I pictured how fast they walked me out before closing time, like I was something that might stain the carpet if left too long. I said, "You don't get to throw me out like trash and then ask me to take responsibility for your team, like I'm still your safety net." He tried to interrupt, but I didn't let him steer it into a shouting match. I kept typing, and I kept remembering what Lyle warned me about, that there might be a mole inside who knew the renewal deadline and let it fail on purpose to force a relocation tied to some investor promise. I didn't have proof, but Orson's comment about leadership shopping for more space kept looping in my head like a broken alarm. Nolan was talking about people, but his leadership had been talking about options. That same night, my phone buzzed with a text from Dorian Kells, the founder from years back. "Heard you left, and I wanted to check if you were okay," it said, and I stared at it because he hadn't checked on me in years. The timing wasn't kindness, and it wasn't nostalgia. It was fear wearing a friendly mask. I took Dorian's call, and he spoke like a guy trying to sound casual while stepping on glass. "Nolan's under pressure right now," he said. "Can you just pause this and give us a little room?" I kept my voice calm because calm made men like him squirm. "I can't pause what I didn't start," I said. "They fired me, and then they missed the deadline." There was a silence. Then Dorian slipped and didn't even realize he'd done it. "We were planning a move anyway," he admitted, and his words sped up like he wanted to outrun them. "The investor wanted a different address." That was the thread, and it pulled the whole sweater apart in my head, because it matched Orson saying leadership had been asking about space options while the renewal clock ran out under my name. After I hung up, I finished the recap email, copied Perry and Sable, and hit send with the same calm tone and neutral words I'd used all week. A minute later, Lyle texted me, "That is gold for the record," and I saved that message right alongside Nolan's voicemail. My phone buzzed again before I even finished rinsing my coffee mug, and Cal's name lit up like a flare. I braced myself because Cal never texted me late unless something had shifted hard inside that office. He wrote, "I shouldn't be sending this, but after what they just tried to do to Junie, you need to see it." Then a screenshot came through, and the second I saw the subject line, I felt my stomach drop in that quiet, heavy way it did when I opened a bad invoice. It was an internal email chain from weeks earlier, and it wasn't vague. It had Sable, Nolan, and Perry on the same thread, talking about separating Bram before renewal negotiations. The chain wasn't subtle, and it wasn't even smart. Sable wrote that removing me would modernize operations and reduce single-point dependency, like I was a weak cable they could unplug without the lights going out. Perry replied with the kind of careful slime lawyers use when they want distance later. "Do it prior to any lease action." Then Nolan wrote, "Good. Bram's risk-averse. We need speed." Reading my name typed out like that, like a problem they had already solved, made my jaw lock. Cal followed it with another text. "So yeah, they knew renewal was coming, and they thought they could handle it without you." I stared at the screenshot until my coffee went cold on the counter, and the feeling wasn't rage like I expected. It was clarity, the kind you get when the fog finally burns off, and you can see the road you were on the whole time. I called Lyle and told him, "Cal sent me an internal chain, and it spells out intent." Lyle didn't ask for drama details because he didn't need them. He said, "Do not forward that to anyone, and do not mention it in writing. Save it, back it up, and we only use it if they push and try to paint you as the saboteur." While I was still on that call, an email from Lyle came in with an attachment from Orson. Orson did what Orson always did, which was follow process like it was religion. The official demand to vacate had been posted again with a follow-up timeline, and Orson's note included the phrase, "No further extensions approved." That line wasn't a warning. That line was a wall. Cal kept reporting from inside the blast zone. Nolan showed up in person. He wrote, big smile, big handshake, acting like a politician at a diner. A second message came in right behind it. Orson didn't even invite him to sit, and Nolan looked lost without an audience. Paper beat charisma when the building manager stayed sober and the logs stayed clean. Junie got dragged into it too, because Sable always needed a smaller person to stand in front of her. Cal wrote, "Sable tried to pin the missed envelope on Junie, saying she didn't route it properly." Then he added, "Junie looked like she might cry, so I told Sable politely that I watched Sable take the envelope herself." That was Cal, trying to keep it professional while watching someone weaponize a temp. The blog followed up with a second post that actually named the company and hinted at internal mismanagement. Somebody posted a photo of the notice on the door from the sidewalk, and the comments turned brutal in that casual way people got when they didn't have to look you in the eye. I didn't scroll long, because online cruelty wasn't evidence, and I didn't need it in my head. Dorian called again that same day, voice smooth like he thought history gave him permission. He said, "We built this place together once, Bram, so don't do this." I said, "Families don't fire the guy holding the lease and then act surprised when the lease holds them." He went quiet, and I ended the call before he could find another angle. Lyle's update came in right after, clean and clinical. Court date is set if they contest it. Posting stands. New tenant approval looks solid. I didn't celebrate, and I didn't rant. I saved Cal's screenshot in my receipts folder, made 2 backups, and labeled the file intent before I shut my laptop. After I shut my laptop, I didn't sit there waiting for the next punch. I went back to normal tasks like I was training my brain to remember I still had a life outside their mess. A few days passed with nothing but small updates, and then Friday morning landed with the kind of certainty you couldn't argue with. Lyle called and kept it simple. "Mara Sloan is touring the suite with Orson today," he said, like he was reading weather. I didn't ask if I should be there, because I already knew the answer, and he confirmed it anyway. "You don't need to show your face," Lyle said. "Paperwork is moving and the building team is handling access." It was the 3rd week of the 30-day notice, which was the exact moment pretending stopped working and logistics took over. People could fake confidence for a while, but they couldn't fake loading docks and elevator schedules. That was when the building stopped being a vibe and turned back into a contract. Cal texted me mid-morning, like he couldn't help himself. "They're packing now, like panic packing," he wrote, and I pictured open drawers and shaky hands even though I wasn't there. A minute later, he added, "Nolan keeps calling it a fast transition, but it is not a transition." Then he finished the thought the way only a tired person did. "It's a scramble, and everybody knows it." The part that made it sting for them wasn't just losing the space. Cal told me Bloom Pulse wasn't some random wellness studio drifting in off the street. "Mara has a signed partnership with that agency Nolan hates," Cal wrote. "The one down the street he keeps mocking on those podcasts." That meant this wasn't only inconvenient. It was humiliating, the kind that stuck to your reputation and didn't wash off. People in the local scene would connect the dots fast, and Nolan's whole brand ran on looking untouchable. Now he was getting pushed out by calm money and clean contracts, and the new tenant had ties to someone he'd been calling a joke. By afternoon, the blog caught the scent and did what blogs did. They ran a loud little piece about creative firms losing ground to wellness brands, like it was a trend story instead of a leadership failure. It wasn't fair, and it wasn't deep, but it was loud, and Nolan cared about loud more than he cared about correct. Cal sent me a short video clip from the sidewalk. It showed staff rolling chairs and monitors into a rented truck, moving like ants trapped in a microwave, fast and confused. Nolan stood near the curb, making big arm motions at someone off camera, jaw working like he was pitching a story nobody wanted. There was no sound, but his body language read clear as subtitles. Sable tried to keep up appearances because that was her hobby. Cal said she printed signs that read Strategic Relocation Week and taped them near the elevator like it was a fun theme instead of a forced evacuation. People laughed under their breath, not out loud, because nobody wanted to be the next target. Orson stayed strict the whole time. Cal said Orson scheduled elevator time blocks and told them which doors they could use, and he didn't bend when Nolan tried to bend him. The building didn't care who had a title, and Orson didn't care who had a smile. Lyle forwarded me confirmation that Mara's first payments cleared and the new lease was fully executed. His message was blunt. It's done, and they can't negotiate you out of this now. That night, I took a slow walk around my neighborhood, kept my phone in my pocket, and didn't check it once as I crossed the street at the corner. When I got back from that walk, I didn't even take my shoes off before my phone started lighting up again. Losing made some people quiet, but it made Sable loud in the sneaky way. When people lose, they tried to make it messy so nobody could tell who won. Cal texted first, and his tone had that tight edge like he was choosing every word carefully. Sable is telling staff you withheld company documents, and she is saying legal is reviewing theft concerns. She wasn't brave enough to say it to me directly, so she floated it through the office like smoke and waited to see who coughed. I didn't respond to Sable, because she wanted a reaction she could screenshot. I called Lyle and told him, they're starting the smear, and I'm not giving them free material. Lyle didn't sound surprised. Good, he said, because I'm shutting it down clean. He drafted a short response that referenced Sable's own property return email, and my documented reply with attachments, and he sent it like a straight line drawn with a ruler. He didn't threaten anyone, but he didn't blink either. Any further statements could cross into defamation, he wrote, and that was enough to make grown adults suddenly remember what consequences were. Perry Quaid tried to act like a peacemaker right after that, which was rich coming from him. He floated a settlement where I'd sign an assignment back to the company if they paid a fee, like he was offering me a coupon for my own spine. Lyle told me, do not take it personally, because Perry's job is to see if you blink. I said, tell him my eyes are open and my inbox is archived. Cal texted again, and this one actually made my jaw tighten. They're asking me to write a statement that you were difficult and uncooperative, he wrote. Then he followed it with, I told them I am not lying to protect someone else's mistake. That kind of courage was rare in an office, and it cost people something, which meant I wasn't going to forget it. Dorian Kells tried a different tactic and went long, like length made his point stronger. He emailed me about legacy and miscommunication, using soft words like he was wrapping a brick in tissue paper. He ended with, I hope you remember who gave you your start. I replied with one sentence and didn't add a greeting. I remember who asked me to sign my name so everyone else could have a future. The public side kept rolling, whether any of us liked it or not. Another blog post popped up, then a local newsletter roundup, and people shared it like gossip was a community service. Somebody clipped Cal's sidewalk video of Nolan and slapped on a caption about when confidence meets contract law, and it wasn't kind, but it was accurate enough to sting. Cal told me the board was holding emergency meetings behind closed doors. Nolan was blaming Sable, Sable was blaming Perry, and Perry was blaming process gaps, like paperwork fell through a crack in the sidewalk. Nobody blamed the actual choice, which was firing the guy who maintained the paper trail, and then acting shocked the trail disappeared. Mara moved in quietly, which made it worse for them. There was no ribbon cutting, no big social post, just painters, boxes, and a new sign going up after hours like a grown-up business doing grown-up business. Quiet success drove loud people crazy, and Nolan had built his whole image on being loud. Then Lyle sent me one more message that felt like the hinge point. Nolan offered, in writing, to reinstate you to resolve the lease issue, he said, and he didn't add emojis or drama because he didn't have to. He followed with, that is an admission they linked your termination to the lease. I didn't throw a victory party, because parties didn't pay rent. I opened my laptop, updated my resume line by line, called a friend about contract work, and then I attached the file to an email and hit send. About a week after the move out, a small padded envelope showed up on my porch, wedged under the welcome mat. No drama, no lawyer letter, just a thank you card from Mara Sloan. Inside, she'd written, we'll take good care of the space, and she'd tucked in 2 gift cards, one for coffee and one for a local bakery. Her handwriting was neat and plain, like she meant it. I stood in my kitchen with the card in my hand, and the tightness in my chest finally loosened. Relief hit first, not satisfaction, and that surprised me because I'd been running on anger for weeks. I didn't want to destroy anyone, and I didn't feel proud of the panic, even if they earned it. I just wanted to stop being treated like a disposable tool they could toss and replace. They fired me like they were deleting a file, and I proved I was the cabinet that held their details. That night, Cal called me instead of texting, and hearing his voice made it all feel real in a different way. He said, the floor feels weird without the old setup, like the building finally exhaled. Then he told me Junie quit the temp agency after Sable tried to pin the missed envelope on her, and Cal added, "She told me she is done being a shield for people who lie." A little later, Lyle emailed, "Case closed, hearing vacated, filings complete, no further action required." At the bottom he wrote, "You handled this clean," and coming from him, that was applause, because he treated compliments like they cost money. The rest drifted in through Cal, Lyle, and outside chatter. About a month later, Nolan stepped away, which sounded gentle until you heard it through the industry grapevine. The company called it a leadership transition, the blog called it a quiet exit, and I didn't call it anything. I wrote the date down, saved the note, and went back to my own life. Sable stayed, at least for a while, because people like her rarely fell fast. They slid sideways into a new title and kept smiling, but I heard her name got stapled to process failures and board notes. Paper followed you when you lived by paper, and she'd lived by it. I went downtown once after lunch, not to gloat, just to look. Bloom Pulse had plants in the corners and clean signage in the windows, and nobody was pretending chaos was strategy. There were no giant posters promising culture or innovation, just a place that looked like adults ran it. When I got home, I opened my desk drawer and took out the dull brass spare Orson had handed me years ago for after-hours vendor access, back when I was the tenant of record. The lock it matched had already been changed by then, so it hadn't opened anything in years, but it proved who had been trusted, and I hung it on the hook by my back door with my truck keys. Hold up for a second. Can I ask you something personal before you click away? If you've got the hype feature, tap it to support this video and help it reach more people, then please subscribe and hit like. It's one click and it matters a lot. And tell me in the comments, if your job tossed you out but your name was still on the paperwork that could save them, would you protect them anyway or let them learn the hard way?